And I think one of the biggest proponents of the blob is someone here on Twitch who doesn't have any foreign policy actual like knowledge or anything. He's a 20-year-old kid, but
Mike, you call them Afghanis. Mike, you tried to pretend that the Viet Cong wasn't involved in the fall of Saigon. Mike, you were trying to use data from the year 2000 from the CIA after attacking me for using CIA information. Look at what that says there, Mike. What does it say under that image? Source, the year fucking 2000, Mike. We invaded Afghanistan in 2001, you fucking dumbass. How? How can you be this physically stupid? How is it possible? I feel like my time on Twitch might actually cancel my political career. Not because of my interactions with Destiny or Vosh or anything else, but because I, right now, might be being ableist. Because I can't think of any other explanation for how somebody could be this stupid. If you completed college and you studied foreign policy, you didn't study international relations, you fucking dumb fuck. If you actually did that, then your teacher needs to be fired. I believe it is an injustice that your teacher continues to teach. If they taught you foreign policy, if you're talking about Afghanistan and you're misciting CIA data with the wrong years, calling them Afghanis while trying to explain their national identity. Hey everybody, how you doing today? Hope you're all having a blessed day so far. That'd be pleasant. Because, you know, I'm not. I am not. So, I very much need to talk about Afghanistan with you all. So, and I don't even know how to start this. So basically, the Taliban won. And obviously, that is a reality that nobody wants to live in. Well, mostly nobody wants to live in. And I have been pretty upset about it. It's legitimately been difficult for me to get sleep. Whether it's been like me trying to get sleep through the COVID vaccine or just me not being able to deal with what's going on. And so I've been doing my best to highlight the suffering that people are going through right now. Because a lot of people are going through immense suffering. People who have lost their families are going to have their family executed. They're going to have the rights that they gained in the last 20 years rolled back, especially women. And it's extremely sad. I don't need to think that the war was run correctly for me to be sad for the minorities that are going to be slaughtered by the Taliban, or feel sad when I see people falling from planes because they're so eager to get out of the country. Because they know that if they stay in the country, their death is almost certain. Because the organization which they fought against for the last 20 years is a theocratic, far-right, fascist organization. So it's been quite upsetting last few days. I've been particularly disappointed with how unprepared we were to take Afghan refugees. Even though this is something that's been talked about for years. And I don't just mean during negotiations. I don't just mean in the last few months. I don't even mean just in the last few years. This is something that's been talked about for years. About what are we going to do when we leave the country for those who are at risk of Taliban assassinations. The thing is, even when we were in the height of fighting the Taliban, The Taliban will make examples of those who participate or help with the U.S. occupation, quote unquote, right? There was many examples of fighters who were fighting for the ANA, were really effective, like helicopter pilots or jet pilots, who the Taliban would target because of how effective they were, because they would work with the government. And when I mean target, I mean like try to go to their homes and kill them for being like a hero on TV that got recognized by Afghani by Afghan television. Anyway, while I was doing that, I made apparently the terrible decision to tweet about a recent comparison many people have been making. And that recent comparison was between the fall of Saigon and now the fall of Kabul. I didn't like that comparison, and there's a few reasons why I didn't like that comparison. But the biggest reason for me why I don't like the comparison between the fall of Kabul and the fall of Saigon is because the Taliban are nothing like the Viet Cong or the North Vietnamese army. Do they have some similarities when it comes to certain human rights abuses like torture? Most certainly. But the Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese army, when they marched into Saigon, were not doing it under the idea that they were going to take 15-year-old girls from the street and sell them off like they were child brides. They were not going to target the education of women. They are not far-right reactionary fascists. They've got problems, but they're far-right reactionary fascists. Now, there are, like, of course, some comparison when it comes to extremely mismanaged conflicts. But when it comes to the fall of Saigon, I just want to make it clear that this isn't like the Saigon of our generation. This is much worse. And that's what I messaged and put a message out of. That this is much worse. Now, apparently, somebody had a problem with that. Because I was highlighting the suffering of Afghan women. And that person who had a problem with it was Mike from PA. Or should I say, Mike from Pashtun. Because I never knew that the PA stood for Pashtun, actually. I thought it stood for Pennsylvania. Apparently, it's Mike from Pashtun. I don't know. It's wild to me. But ever since I engaged with him on Twitter about Afghanistan, the dude's been subtweeting about me. The dude apparently did a stream this early morning about me, which I guess we're going to take a look at. Amongst the many things he wanted to go after, he wanted them part go after me. And I thought it was pretty scummy, because the dude engaged in some of the most bad faith and interactions I've ever seen. Because if anybody saw what I was saying here, anybody would know that what I'm saying here is basically that, hey, when the Kabul falls, it's going to be really bad. And making the comparison between Saigon and Kabul is not good, because actually, it's much worse. And we need to talk about it as if it's worse. And for him, this was a evil statement of great evil. So let's just go through a bunch of this. Apparently, this was enough to set him off permanently about me. And then we'll move into his stream. Which, by the way, I still can't believe that he had 2 days to research our interaction where we went back and forth, and he is still getting information about Afghanistan wrong. He had 2 days to Google claims and figures and statistics, and he's still getting them wrong. He chose to do the stream in response, and he still got it wrong. Anyway. If Kabul falls, it will be much worse than the fall of Saigon. Nah, yes, not even comparable. We have no national interest there at all. Biden is right. Okay, so national interest. I don't know what he means by like national security interest, what he means by this. I assume he means like the people instead of like great power politics. I don't think he studied international relations, so I don't know what he thinks he's saying here. But I'm not even making an argument from a national interest standpoint of, well, this is a good position to have American troops considering it gives us access to the region and it stops the Al-Qaeda from reforming or yada yada, or, you know, because a great power competition with China. It doesn't really matter. He believes there's no national interest there. And I don't really think we should stay for national interest either. But so it doesn't really matter. But he believes there's no national interest there at all. Biden is right. And Dylan is making a point rooted in humanitarian concern, not as assessment of American national interest. Objectively speaking, the results for the Afghan people of the Taliban taking over Kabul will be catastrophic. Do you contest this? I thought it would end here. Humanitarian concern. Lamau. We ally with the worst butchers in the world. That's a joke. See, this is when I realized right here that I don't think this is going to be a very polite interaction. This isn't going to be us like engaging on like, well, what was the best way to withdrawal? Or what about the refugees? Or how can we try to reduce the suffering of people? Humanitarian concern. Dylan is making a point rooted in humanitarian concern, not an assessment of American national interest. So does Mike from PA believe that my reason for wanting to do a withdrawal differently is for American national security concerns or American national interests or nothing to do with humanitarian reasons, and that I'm faking it? And the proof against it was that we ally with the worst butchers in the world. That's a joke. Well, I mean, newsflash. I am not the American government. I don't choose what allies we choose or don't choose. If I did, we'd have a very different relationship with Turkey, for example. This is a whataboutism. Because if you were to ask me about our relationship with Turkey, you know what I would say? It needs to be drastically changed due to the humanitarian concerns of the northeastern Syrian population and of the Kurds within Turkey. And that they, not only for the humanitarian reasons, but because they are spreading conflict generally. Whether you look at Azerbaijan and their support of them and their invasion of Armenian territory, whether you look at northeastern Syria and their invasion into the SDF-controlled territory, which we could have easily stopped, or whether we talk about Libya and what they're doing there with their drones. If you were to go issue by issue through these dictators, I'm sure we wouldn't find too much disagreement. So I don't know where this came from. It just fucking baffles me. I said that it would be worse because many people making the comparison. The Viet Cong did not want to marry off little girls and take away women's basic human rights. They, of course, had human rights abuses, but they are not comparable. I never mentioned American interests. Then this right here, it was over. Like, I knew at this point, this guy's he's just acting like a prick. Because this is something that's completely unrelated to what we're talking about. This is something that's completely unrelated to Afghanistan, and he's trying to get Dunkaroos. He responds to me by pivoting. Because he doesn't want to address me talking about how the Viet Cong was not as bad as the Taliban. When we talk about comparing these two forces. Or that the fall of Saigon is not going to have the same humanitarian impact that the fall of Kabul is going to. And that I have no interest in the national security concerns when evaluating how our withdrawal is going. I'm purely trying to look at this at the moment through humanitarian interests. Because withdrawals affect people. Whether or not you agree with the war, how you withdraw is going to affect how people live and die, or how the war goes forward. Look at Syria. This is a prime example. Let's say that you don't want troops in northeastern Syria. Now, I can go back and forth about the importance of Operation Inherent Resolve, talk about how the instability that was in northeastern Syria ceased once the SDF was able to push back ISIS, that this operation was the most successful anti-ISIS campaign in the world. And it's giving the Kurds and many other groups in northeastern Syria the first chance at self-determination that they've ever had. In Syria, that is, of course. And I can talk about how Michael Brooks and Noam Chomsky and their views on Syria. And I can get into the depths of, like, even if you don't want to support Operation Inherent Resolve, okay, but if we withdraw, we don't withdraw by announcing it in the middle of the night and just pulling out our troops randomly and hurting thousands upon thousands of people. Because of how disorganized our withdrawal from northeastern Syria was, politicians was pulled out of cars and shot. So it is important to talk about how withdrawal goes so we can minimize negative impacts. One of my main criticisms of left-wingers talking about foreign policy and how we need to leave Afghanistan is they never talked about, like, how do we do it? Exactly how is this operation going to go? What agreement are we going to come to with organizations that we're fighting? And how many refugees are we going to take? How are we going to get these refugee documents sorted out so we can get these people to the United States? This has always been one of my biggest criticisms, because saying I want universal health care is, like, nice and all, but unless you talk about a good strategy on how to get universal health care, then it doesn't matter. If we don't talk about what type of plan we're going to have to get universal health care, what that universal health care is going to look like, then it's pointless. Anyway, he responds, the Viet Cong is not what took Saigon. It was the North Vietnamese regular army. Are you not aware of the difference? This right here was when I was like, okay, this is on. This guy is acting in bad faith. He doesn't care. Because this has nothing to do with Afghanistan. He's pivoting away from the points I'm making. He's pivoting away from the fact that I am just saying that this is much worse than the fall of Saigon because of the impact it's going to have when it comes to women and girls. When it comes to what the Taliban is going to do. And that these two instances are not comparable. And I wasn't trying to put any moral weight on the fall of Saigon whatsoever, because I'm not an expert on Vietnamese affairs. I'm not. I haven't really studied Vietnamese affairs that much, so I don't comment on it very often. I'm not an expert on Vietnamese affairs. But it's really weird for MikeFromPA to suddenly just pivot to this topic because he can't discuss Afghanistan. Let me just say, there's no way he is ever going to get into any room to talk to me about this issue. And of course, I'm open to it. Now, he'll, of course, say it's debate culture or whatever, but there's no way these positions that he's putting forward here are at all defensible, and he thinks he's actually acting in good faith when he tries to get this dunk. Which, by the way, this dunk isn't even fucking true. If you're going to correct me on the Viet Cong and the Vietnamese War, which I'm not an expert on, and you're trying to use it as a pivot, at least get your information right. Because you know what? Even though this was obviously just to disregard my intelligence and disregard my opinion, he got the information wrong. Right here. The fall of Saigon. North Vietnamese regular army and the Viet Cong. So they were involved in the fall of Saigon. So how do you choose this random thing to pivot to try to show me up, to try to make me look like an idiot, to try to prove that I'm just some like dumb kid because you don't want to talk to me directly about Afghanistan or my position on Afghanistan, and the one thing you choose to pivot to, you somehow still fuck it up? That is magical. That is a level of Olympic mental gymnastics that was so brutal, so awful, that when Conor McGregor broke his ankle from that pivot, actually, you know what? That actually explains it. Yeah, I don't know if you guys watch UFC, but the last fight Conor McGregor had, his ankle just snapped. His foot was like this, and then it snapped. I believe that this pivot right here caused that. That it was so impactful, so intense, and so bad faith that it went back a month or two and snapped Conor McGregor's ankle. That the impact singularly hit Conor McGregor and caused him to lose that fight. So I don't understand why he's trying to pivot to this, number one. And number two, he pivots to this and still fucks it up. Lamau, it was the regular Vietnamese army unit representing the nation of North Vietnam. They even paused for 24 hours so the Americans would have time to evacuate. Look immediately left on the same wiki page. Okay. The thing is, if you read what he's talking about right here, this makes me feel like talking to Mike might actually be ableist in some way. Because he highlights right here, like, well, look, it was the North Vietnamese army, you idiot. People's Army of Vietnam. And that's what he highlights. The next words, right after he highlighted it, says, and the Viet Cong. People's Army of Vietnam. He highlights that, stops it, doesn't need to look into it anymore. Right next to it, and the Viet Cong. How does he pivot to an issue I basically know next to nothing about, except for like broad like American history class teachings, and he still fucks it up? And he fucks it up brutally and completely. So he pivots to this because he wants to act bad faith, and he doesn't want to answer any of the questions or the conclusions I had to on Afghanistan, and he still fucks it up. I'm baffled by the levels of bad faith that are going on here. But I don't know if I can even be angry, because it's like somebody cheating by like slashing your tires in a race, but then they immediately like accelerate and then slam into like a flagpole and die on impact. Like, could I be angry that they cheated? I mean, I guess, but they're also just not good at what they do. So it doesn't really matter that much. They could pivot to literally anything. They could cheat how any way they want, but they're still gonna look like a fucking idiot. Read the next sentence. And the Viet Cong. I never said the North Vietnamese army had no involvement, just that the Viet Cong did. Stop fishing for dunks. It makes you look like you don't actually care about what you're talking about. Which, you know what? I do not think Mike actually cares. And the reason why I don't think he cares about the population of Afghanistan is because Mike from PA has not talked about the condition that Afghans are going to face moving forward at all. He thinks and pretends that he cares. But through the entirety of this interaction, and his stream the next day, and the stream he did today, he doesn't talk about the crimes of the Taliban. He doesn't talk about the impact it's going to have going forward. He doesn't talk about the child marriages that the Taliban push forward. He doesn't talk about any of that. So it's weird for him when other people bring that up to stand up and say, actually, stop that. And then I say, don't you care? Of course I do. I just never talk about it, ever. You know what it sounds like? I've talked to a lot of right-wingers about the Capitol riots. You know, I was at the Capitol riots. I was the dumbass who had the gall to wear a Biden hoodie in DC during January 6th. And it feels like when I talk about the Capitol riots and I'll have like a right-winger walk in and they'll be like, what about BLM, huh? What about Orlando? Oh, not Orlando. What is it? Portland. What about Portland, huh? Yeah, okay, whatever about, yeah, it was bad what happened, but let's talk about BLM in Portland and Antifa. Why aren't you talking about Antifa? You're now all of a sudden you care, but what about Antifa? That's what it sounds like. Because they say they care, but then they never talk about the consequences of the day. They never talk about what happened when they did that. They never talk about the impact of January 6th. And that's what it feels like with him and the Taliban. Do I think he actually supports the Taliban? No, but it's really weird that he says, like, of course the Taliban are bad. And then that'll be it. Then everything else is, well, let me talk about the Viet Cong for no reason. And, you know, stop undermining Biden and all this. It feels so fucking stupid. It makes me feel like he doesn't genuinely care. And that this solely is, in his purview, an issue that matters because of how it affects American politics and not how it affects Afghan politics. Anyway, the fall of Saigon was good, Dylan. Say it. Again. Completely irrelevant to the conversation I was trying to have. Why are you doing this? Do you not care about what's going to happen to all those who will be executed, raped, and had their rights taken away? And had nothing to do with what we were talking about. This had nothing to do with what we were talking about. You are unbelievably frustrating human being to interact with. I am doing my best to be nice. I'm not nice anymore because I've heard what he said on stream today. But I was trying my best to be unbelievably cordial. The US is ultimately responsible by our creation of the Taliban through our Pakistani ISI allies and the support of the Mujahideen during the war against the Soviets. So everything the Taliban does really is something we did. Maybe we should try not interfering for a while. Okay. So, I just want to let everybody know in my chat that you cannot sue me for exposure to radiation or from any brain tumors you may have just suffered from hearing that sentence out loud. Twitch doesn't cover my healthcare. I'm not going to cover yours for what you were just exposed to. I'm sorry. Now, the first thing is to say that everything the Taliban does is actually us, while we're simultaneously fighting the Taliban, is so fucking moronic. I don't know what to believe. I don't know how to say that. Like, his argument is that we in some way contributed to the Taliban becoming a thing because we supported the Mujahideens against the Soviet military during the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. Therefore, everything past that point is our fault. Even if we're fighting the Taliban, if our enemies fight, if we're fighting the Taliban, they're our enemies, it's still our fault. Okay. So the thing is, at some point, other organizations are responsible for what they did. And the blame, a lot of this does fall on the Taliban. This is a weird... Oh, alarm in the background. This is a weird, like strange. Can you turn off the alarm? Thank you. This is a weird removal of blame from anything from the Taliban. Like, no blame can be placed at the Taliban, just play it at the United States. And we can play this game, by the way. We can play this historical game. Let's play this historical game. Okay. You know, we could say that the Nazis were at fault for the Holocaust. We could say that Adolf Hitler was at fault for World War II. But the Americans also signed the Treaty of Versailles. So really, it's America's fault. Now, is it true that part of the butterfly effects from us signing the Treaty of Versailles led to World War II, led to the Holocaust, led to a lot of things? That is true. But for you to have this kind of black and white interpretation of history, it feels like you don't actually care about where the blame properly lays, because a lot of the blame obviously lays on, and I would say the vast majority, on Hitler. The vast majority of the blame lays on the Nazis. When it comes to the Taliban, it is true that us working with our Pakistani allies in the ISI did lead to certain funds and weapons and munitions going to the Mujahideen. But let's be clear. Number one, this leaves out the fact that the Mujahideen was not one singular organization after the Soviets left out. There was multiple groups we gave funding to, many of which fought the Taliban. And if you're going to make the assertion to me that this was completely our fault, you would need to, number one, take all moral responsibility from the Taliban, even though I do think we are partially at fault. You would need to take all moral responsibility from the Taliban and its leadership. Number two, you would have to state that while somehow that our funding of the Mujahideen led to the Taliban getting more funding generally than the rest of the Mujahideen, and therefore the Taliban beating the rest of the organizations, which we also funded and helped give munitions to, was purely our fault. And on top of everything, that if it wasn't for our funding of the Mujahideen, the Soviets would have won the war in Afghanistan. And even if they didn't, and you think that that wasn't the scenario you want to go with, and they still won, that the Taliban wouldn't have won out in that reality either. The thing is, when you go into history and talk about one thing, placing the entirety of a blame on one nation or one government is reductive. So trying to say that everything the Taliban does is really something we did, when we're two separate organizations with completely separate interests, and there was multiple other parties involved, and they are most certainly responsible for many of their actions, while we've also fought them, man. It feels like a weird thing to even argue. Like, if you wanted to ask me about the ISI and if we should have trusted them, my answer to you would have been no. But that doesn't mean that everything the Taliban did is really the United States doing it. It would make as much sense that saying that everything that Hitler did was really the United States because we supported the Treaty of Versailles. It's extremely reductive and doesn't examine history from like an objective lens or for like standing back and looking at all the parties involved. It is simply, you would say, if you had an agenda and you didn't want to actually examine history from all the players involved, or the consequences of the Soviet invasion, or the other players that we gave guns to, or us fighting the Taliban, or the Taliban's personal responsibility. So all I say is, do you care about what's going to happen to all those killed? And he doesn't answer. He says this brain tumor of a sentence. And I don't even say what I said now, because he's not engaging with me anymore. He's engaging with a mystical person who didn't bring up anything he just said, who didn't bring up national security interests, who wasn't trying to move the conversation over to the Viet Cong. So no, I say, all I said was the Taliban is bad. If fascists were taking over a random country, I don't need a policy prescription to know that is bad. You're reading way too much into the tweet. Your analysis is so unbelievably shallow that I could not even call it a kiddie pool. What gets me is, again, I am not making a policy prescription. I can tell you all that the opioid crisis is terrible and god-awful and not give you a policy prescription. I can tell you that phone scammers who call grandmas and try to steal all their money from them is terrible and not give you a policy prescription. And I can bring attention to an issue without giving a policy prescription. And that's not even to say I don't have a policy prescription going forward. My policy prescription going forward is take as many refugees as physically possible. Everything else is shoulda, coulda, woulda. Like, we could have done a withdrawal differently. We could have conducted ourselves differently in the war. We could have done this. We could have done that. But it's all shoulda, coulda, woulda at this point. Then this is what really baffled me. You were undermining Biden's attempt to get us out of this losing war with this babble. If you care about the humanitarian costs of our failed war, you'd be supporting immigration of Afghani war refugees, not baying for intervention by the United States. Okay, number one, they're not called Afghanis, right? Afghani is a currency. They're Afghans. They're Afghans. I see this a lot. They're called Afghans, okay? This is like somebody talking about Mexican politics, and then they come out and say, they're Mexicanians. Yes, we need to deal with the Mexicanians in this policy, and we need to see what we can do to help the Mexicanian refugees. It's like, oh yeah, you very obviously know a decent amount about Mexico, buddy. Afghanis. So the first thing is, I do support this. He never asked me if I supported this. I've always supported this. I've called for this on multiple streams and on multiple occasions. So I don't know why he's bringing this up. He's like, if you did care, you'd do this. Motherfucker, I've done this a lot longer than you have been doing this. I've been doing this for months, man, calling for this. Because I knew this was going to happen for months. And that's why I was scared about with this withdrawal, because they were not properly evacuating people. They were not getting these people through the proper processes to get them to the United States, to take them in as refugees. That's one of my biggest criticisms of Joe Biden right now, is that he has miserably failed when it comes to getting these people ready to get out of the country. So I don't, dude, this is fucking blowing my mind. I stated the reality that theocratic fascists taking over a country is bad. You read that as a condemnation of Biden's policy of full military withdrawal. That just sounds like projection to me. I have also talked openly many times about our need to take in more Afghan refugees. The thing that gets me is if you think that I'm undermining Biden here, what you're saying is that by me acknowledging the reality, the stone cold hard fact that women are going to have their rights revoked, that the Taliban is not stopping their child brides anytime soon, that they have a long history of war crimes, and they've been executing ANA prisoners, or they're killing and slaughtering of minority groups in Afghanistan, that all of these things are going to contribute for conditions worsening in Afghanistan. If me stating that fact, which is a fact, that they're going to roll back women's rights, if me stating that fact is undermining Biden, then what you're saying is that reality is not in conjunction with Biden's policies, which actually just sounds like projection from you, that you acknowledge, even though I don't even agree with this, that if we acknowledge the reality of the situation, that it doesn't make Biden look very good, and it makes the withdrawal look god-awful. If we need to deny the truth about the humanitarian situation to make Biden look good, count me the fuck out. I thought everybody else was the fake lefties, that there's not good lefties on this platform, Mike. Everyone else are just these fake lefties. But you know what, Dylan? If you criticize Biden for how he managed a military withdrawal from Afghanistan that is going to lead to far-right fascists taking control, the pushing back of women's rights after he terribly bungled the acceptance of tens of thousands of refugees, if you acknowledge that reality, you are undermining Joe Biden. And I'm the bad lefty. He's the good lefty. Because the good lefty doesn't bring up reality. Because if reality comes up, it could make Biden look bad. Dude, what is this weird defense of Joe Biden? That I can't criticize him for stuff like this? Because if I criticize him or bring up the reality of the situation, which this wasn't even a criticism of Joe Biden, it was just an acknowledgement of reality, I'm undermining them? We could apply this in so many ways. If we acknowledge the reality that Joe Biden's healthcare plan isn't perfect, well, then we're undermining Joe Biden's ability to win in the midterms. Well, if we acknowledge Joe Biden's racist past, well, then we're undermining his ability to win black voters. So therefore, we can't acknowledge it. Well, this is I don't know. This is some weird Biden simpage I have never even participated in, man. This is fucking weird. Okay, so you agree with Biden then. I do support a drawdown and the removal of U.S. forces. I made that very clear here. I support the removal of U.S. forces from Afghanistan. I do not know how more clear I could be than that. Personally, I think more grounded deals should have been done beforehand, weapons deals and supporting the Air Force, in a different timetable. I'm sorry that me acknowledging the suffering of Afghans make Biden look bad. So all I'm saying here is that while I support the drawdown and removal, I wish it could have been done differently. Just like I support, for example, the $1.2 trillion budget. Infrastructure bill. And the $3.5 trillion budget. But I do think there's certain things that we could have done differently. We could have added more to that bill. I think that there's more stuff that could have been shoved into that legislation to make it better. Me acknowledging that can also coexist with the fact that I support the bill. This happens all the time. For example, I do not think that the Affordable Care Act is enough for healthcare in this country. And I don't think that Medicare is run perfectly in this country. But I still support a Medicare expansion. And I believe that we should make people, make governments across the nation support the ACA. And to not restrict their people's access to the Affordable Care Act. And that we should properly fund the resources necessary to make the Affordable Care Act as effective as possible until we get to that goal that I want one day. Me acknowledging that is just me having criticisms that we could have gone further or done more. Maybe for Mike from PA, this is the perfect withdrawal. That maybe with Afghans literally falling from planes as we try to take off is Mike from PA's perfect scenario. And me acknowledging this could undermine Biden. Can somebody send me that footage? It's really terrible. But I don't think it's nobody dies. I don't think it's a graphic. Let me see if I can just get an image of it, because I'd rather not. It really upsets me, and I imagine it also upsets all of you guys as well. Let me see if I can find it. I don't remember it being it isn't graphic, but it's really hard to watch because people are because you're just watching people die. It's not graphic, but you're watching people so desperate that they know that if they don't get on one of these planes, they're gonna die, so they might as well risk it. That's terribly depressing. That is terribly, terribly, terribly depressing. I can't seem to find it. If anybody can actually send it to me, I'd appreciate it. And let me be clear, like, I don't even disagree with this dude that much. Like, is this really, like, for example, let me throw something out there. Now let me make it like a much bigger difference, right? I don't agree with people who support third parties. I really don't. I think third parties are terribly ineffective. But if you're trying to get the same goals as me, ultimately, through third parties, I'm not going to try to... If I will acknowledge that if I treat you negatively, I'm being a piece of shit. If I'm treating you like really, really bad, then I'm being a piece of shit. Because ultimately, I think we all want the same things. So I can understand like a policy disagreement. But the amount of bad faith that is going on here is so bizarre to me. And it just shows me clearly that he doesn't actually care about what my position is. He just saw an instance to fucking go after me because I didn't completely suck the dick of Joe Biden. And boom, now I'm the big bad. Oh, is this it? Okay. So, I'm not going to show the footage, but I will show this picture. So, that tiny dot that you see under the plane is a person falling off of it. The reason why they're falling off of it is because they know that if the Taliban gets their hands on them, there's a really good chance they're going to be executed and tortured and treated terribly. Therefore, with no of these refugees' visas and no of these refugee information being approved for this individual and many others, they decided to take the risk and to grab onto the wheels of the airplane. And then when the wheels retracted into the airplane, they fell to their death. And they died. Nobody can look me in the eyes and tell me that this was managed perfectly. That everything's fine, everything's great, and there are no criticisms abound about how this withdrawal went. When stuff like this happens, that usually means that the withdrawal wasn't perfect. Because it wasn't. It was terribly, terribly flawed. You acknowledge that Biden's healthcare plan sucked now is not the same as acknowledge it when a vote or campaign is on. You know this. Timing of public statements matter. Well, I get what you're saying, but the difference is there's no way in hell that anybody saying that this withdrawal is going poorly is going to lead to a staying in Afghanistan. It's over. Everybody sees the writing on the walls. The amount of effort that would need to be put in political suicide that Joe Biden would need to engage in to redeploy a full-scale conflict into Afghanistan, he would need about 100,000 troops to be deployed. and they would need to go on a massive bombing campaign. And that redeployment would most likely be in vain at this point. Why? Because the Afghan National Army might be able to be saved, but they're going to see what happened. They're going to see that Kabul was on the brink, and that, honestly, the Americans were quick to withdraw. They were pulling out, then they reversed course. What if they reverse course again? If anything, the ANA would probably be put in a worse position than they were before we even withdrew. Not to mention, it's political suicide. 66 to 70% of Americans support the withdrawal. He is not going to stop it. Therefore, if I know he's not going to stop the withdrawal at this point, because the time to reverse it has already passed, I think me criticizing the fact that fucking refugees are falling from planes and the withdrawal could have been done a little differently so fucking refugees don't fall from planes and have their skulls smashed against the concrete, I think is valid. Not to mention, I've released videos supporting the withdrawal. You just check my video with Xander Hall, where I tried to talk to him about why I think we still should withdraw. "60% of Americans supported withdrawal because he was not honest." Well, 66 to 70%. Because he was not honest that this approach would lead to this. No, I don't think so. I honestly don't think so. I do not believe the vast majority of Americans actually think we should stay in Afghanistan, even if this is the outcome. I genuinely believe that. I think maybe with enough primetime coverage, you could maybe do it. But foreign policy doesn't get that attention. Ever since Osama bin Laden was shot, this war was on a clock. It was a ticking of the clock to signify whether this war was going to extend further or not. Once Osama bin Laden was dead, Americans checked out. They didn't care anymore. The vast majority of them. And it was just as, man, we're still there after 20 years? Didn't we get Osama? Where's the Al-Qaeda? I think it's time to go home. And the vast majority of the rhetoric I'm seeing online right now is, well, you can't make a people change their ways. So if we can't beat the Taliban, then let's go home, boys. I don't think that even faced with this reality, that Americans would not have supported a withdrawal. They probably would have supported a withdrawal in a different manner, like I propose, but I doubt it. I doubt that they would want to stay longer. I mean, like Vietnam. Do you really think if most Americans knew what was going to happen in Vietnam, that they wouldn't have still supported a withdrawal? May have been a withdrawal in a different manner, but most Americans would have still supported it because they were war weary. Anyway. 71,000 civilians, deaths, and $2.2 trillion later, you'd think it was just spend another few years, then supporting our puppets. Then they will finally stand up on their own. How old are you again? Okay, number one, I think the timetable could have been differently, because I think we should have, if apparently we didn't have enough time to get these people through the refugee process, then obviously I'm willing to stay as long as possible to get refugees home, which is not going to be 4 years. Be very clear if we're concentrating on it. Could just be a couple of months. Could be maybe a year max. Pulling those refugees out are super important to me. That's up to almost 100,000 lives that are at risk. That's the first thing. The second thing, you think if we just spend a few years there supporting our puppets, then they will finally stand up on their own? No. I never said we stay there. I specifically say we leave, but make grounded deals. For example, I believe that the ANA and the Afghan government should have been present at the first negotiations of the deal that Trump was doing. Number two, I believe that if we were going to do this deal, a ceasefire when the deal was signed was necessary to save lives. because the violence escalated once the deal was signed. Obviously, being present, I mean, that's self-evident now. Number 3, I believe that there's other ways we could have supported the ANA that would not have guaranteed they win, but would have given them a fighting chance, which I think is the least we could have done. Particularly when it comes to supporting their Air Force, which is something, up until a few days ago, the Taliban did not have the operating capacity to combat fully. They don't have their own Air Force. They do have anti-air equipment, but they don't have their own Air Force. It's one of the advantages the ANA had. These are all, like, see, the thing is, everything I'm saying requires nuance, though. This all requires nuance, and it's something that Mike lacks. Because I'm not saying let's not withdraw. I'm just saying we should have withdrawn differently. That's all I'm saying. And I think with the fact that there's people falling from fucking planes right now, I have been vindicated in that position. Do you think that us supporting the ANA from afar is going to stop the war? Do you think that us not supporting the ANA from afar is going to stop the war? Americans are not the only ones that can kill, Mike, and the war does not stop with our withdrawal. The least we can do is support the Afghan government within the means that are politically viable. There are no ways to support the ANA because it's not a real organization. They aren't even putting up a fight. I mean, Jesus, at least read the Afghanistan papers if you're going to pretend to be a foreign policy expert. Number 1, Mike, you were calling them Afghanis like 5 minutes ago, okay? And you tried to pivot to Vietnam and then couldn't admit that the Viet Cong was involved in the fall of Saigon. So don't question my foreign policy credentials or that I don't know what the fuck I'm talking about when you are just making error after error after error in a tweet you didn't even need to respond to. Even after you pivot. And the idea that the ANA is not a real organization, I mean, I guess, I think that's pretty words, really. That's just moral grandstanding. Like, they're not real because they're a puppet. Okay. Do you think that, like, all the people who had, like, coffins come home with, like, Afghans who have fought for the ANA and families who have had to bury them, do you think they felt that that organization was real? Or that the cause for maybe a better Afghanistan with this experiment called democracy, do you think it was real to them? Do you think it was real to the thousands upon thousands upon thousands of ANA soldiers who died fighting the Taliban, an organization that was going to take many of their children and make them into child brides or take their sisters and daughters' rights away? It was a real organization, even if it was mismanaged. That's just more grandstanding. That's all that is. Now, this is where it gets silly. 60% of the population believes that the ANA is honest and fair, which is much better than any polling you can find for support for the Taliban, which is up from 2016 polling, by the way. They have many problems, but don't be hyperbolic about a lack of legitimacy. I could also talk about, like, international recognition, but, like, that doesn't matter. Say at least. Debate this guy live? He's not going to debate me. He's not. There's no way in hell he would do it. Because the thing is, he's making so many errors here. It's very evident that he just doesn't have, like basic knowledge about the war. This is somebody who just read the Afghanistan papers and then said, I'm an expert. And by the way, can I just make clear, I have said multiple times to stop calling me a foreign policy expert. I've said it on Twitter, I've said it on stream, I've said it in videos, that I don't like the term foreign policy expert. Instead, when I make a statement on foreign policy, you can look at the history of my statements on foreign policy. You can look at my job history around it. You can look at my studies that I've done on it, right? You don't need to call me a foreign policy expert or try to say this or saying that I'm pretending to be one, try to delegitimize my points. You can't combat what I said, so you're just trying to make it sound like I'm uncredible. But he's the one who's credible on Afghanistan. I mean, he loves the Afghani population. Why? Wait, are you citing a CAA front org? My lord, okay, even Samantha Power would blush. I think I'm done. Now, we're going to get into that in a moment, but I just wanted to read the full interaction about this and then explain. This doesn't make any sense. Please tell me of any other polling org that did the polling so well. Take issue with how the polling was done, not the Asia Foundation. Tell me how the polling was done wrong or it is incorrect in some manner. I hate gray zone, but if they did polling, I would need to find out if they messed up the polling before I could dismiss it. Same reason why we didn't completely dismiss internal campaign polling and polling from semi-partisan organizations. I'll explain it to you. It's very likely that the CIA front group headquartered in the United States may only publicize information useful to the U.S. effort to stay in Afghanistan. Also, the method of the polling, a country where only a fraction even own a phone, and 43% are literate. The idea that some poll you found Googling... Okay, he says that like it's weird. By the way, I don't understand that. The idea that some poll you found Googling is evidence. Why is he attacking the idea of like doing your own research on the internet or like checking or like fact checking with the internet or looking for information online? Like how else would I find information? Would I go to the local library and be like, could you please print me out the Afghanistan poll from afghanistannews.com? And then they pull it out? Like, how else am I supposed to find polling on an issue, Mike? Mike, I know you've used polling on your channel before when it comes to Medicare for All. Did you not use Google, Mike? What did you use, Mike? Mike, what did you use? Did you go to the fucking Chamber of Commerce to get the information from them directly? Are you going to go into Afghanistan and personally ask every Afghan citizen their opinion on the Afghanistan war, Mike? Or did you Google as well? Why? Why, man? What the fuck is this? Number 1, partisan. Okay, that's a fair criticism you could make about any organization. The problem is, this stuff just takes seconds to look up. If you go to the Asia Foundation's report in 2019 and 2020, about 60% of the population think the ANA is generally honest and fair, and that the people generally are terrified of the Taliban. There are people who have sympathies for the Taliban. The vast majority of people do not. Well, maybe this is a CIA operation, I guess. Now, this may have some legitimacy if you're brain dead, but there's just one issue. You can look at the Asia Foundation's work in Afghanistan before. You can look. There's a history of it. They've been doing these surveys for a while now. Look, here's just one example. If you go to the survey from 2009, you know what it says? It says that about over half the population have sympathies with the Taliban. Now, if they were a CIA organization that is purely acting in the interests of advancing U.S. interests and making the ANA look great, America look great, and not at all releasing any information that is critical, why would they be releasing in 2009, during the height of our involvement in Afghanistan, information showing that there might be a decent amount of the population that is sympathetic to the Taliban? But then 2019 rolls around, and I guess once the tension has lowered and there's not the same amount of soldiers dying and we don't have the same level of involvement, now magically, that's when they start rigging the polls. Not in 2009 when we had the largest amount of our involvement, but in 2019 and 2020, that's when the Asia Foundation rigged the polls. See, I don't like Russia Today. I don't like Gray Zone. But if the polling data they provide is legitimate and I can't find many issues with it, then I'm not going to go around banging my head against the wall, just throwing away some of the most vital information we have on what the Afghan population thinks of the war to date. Dylan, are there any pro-Taliban polling groups? Not that I know of. What would their poll say? Maybe then you can take the number as a minimum, for example, to create a range. Well, the problem is, the organizations involved in Afghanistan that have the means to do polling, the Taliban was not part of that population because they would have to go into Afghan cities and just start polling people. And they're not wasting their time doing that. They're gonna spend their time fighting. Is this the poll? Let me see. Okay. Okay, that's fair. That's fair. Okay, you got me there. Okay. Okay, you got me. What a fucking more. The idea that some poll you found Googling, I don't know why he goes after Googling. Polling people is extremely difficult in countries that are underdeveloped and in civil war. All I can do is work with the information that I have available in front of me, and this is one of, if not the, most in-depth report done on the matter that has the least problematic methods of conducting a survey. In counter to my data, you provided me one quote from an Afghan. Not saying my data is perfect, but you can't even provide any. One important data point is the fact that the ANA has dissolved like mist in front of the Taliban. They aren't even resisting, Dylan. Many surrender and are lucky if they're not immediately executed, and many resist. Do I need to send you combat reports? I was willing to dig up combat reports to talk about the ANA that did resist, number one. And number two, the other issue I have with this is, what is this point? Legitimately, what is the point here? What is the point he's making? There is no national Afghani identity. Those words right there should discredit him from talking about Afghanistan. Those words. Because you want to know what? That isn't real, what he just said. There aren't Afghanis. They're fucking Afghans. How are you going to try to act like you know about Afghan identity or the identity of the Pashtun population or any other population, and you don't even know what to fucking call them? Now, I understand that you can get pronunciations wrong every once in a while. I do too. I still have a problem pronouncing Hazra, but at least I spell it right. And at least I know I'm pronouncing it wrong. He has no clue. He's spelling it wrong. This would be like me saying, look, buddy, I think you should step aside and stop talking about Mexico. Because, see, I know a lot about the Mexicanian population. You are approaching a Western land. I say there is resistance, just not strong enough resistance to push back the Taliban. I guess Poland and Palestine are not legitimate because they did not resist hard enough. Mike makes right A. Blah, blah. This goes on for a while, okay? This keeps going and keeps going and keeps going. I could do this literally all day, but I think that's enough of me literally just going through this. I think everybody gets what I'm getting at. There's a lot of just bullshit in here. Now, this is where it pissed me off, right? I would simply not have had the CIA support a military coup in that country and be allowed to have the Democratic leader continue his Democratic term in office. Brilliant, Mike. Brilliant. Great. If I had a time machine, then I would have done that too, Mike. Great. Did you ever listen to Mike Gravel when you worked for him or nah? What a fucking scumbag, man. I worked on the Mike Gravel campaign. I was deputy state director. Then I was state director. Then I was deputy regional director for the East Coast. I worked on the campaign. His campaign. What, do you have any evidence that I didn't work for him? By the way, I did listen to Mike Gravel. You want to know why I listened to Mike Gravel? Let's look this up quick. The reason why is that I interviewed him. I've talked to him. I still have his phone number in my fucking phone, man. I still do. I can't bring myself to delete it. I've talked to the man. I have his fucking phone number. I worked for him. And you are bringing this up not because you care. You're bringing this up to spite me. You're bringing up my dead boss, which I've been very public about, that I'm still upset about the man dying, because without this man, I would have nothing that I have today. And you're trying to dig that up to throw in my face. Honestly, I think you should try your love quest with Bad Bunny again, because you two have a lot in common. A lot. This is really scummy, man. And the thing is, there is an actual way you can bring this up, and it can be a genuine conversation. Me and, for the love of God, Rob Noor brought this up to me in a responsible manner. When I brought up Mr. Mike Gravel, when we were talking about Syria, and then he asked what Mike Gravel's position would be on Syria, and I said, oh, we would probably disagree on certain aspects of the war. But you want to know what? I also disagree with Mike Gravel on nuclear energy. He didn't like nuclear energy. You've been trying to use footage of him for the last few days. By the way, he's using footage that I helped produce on his stream while talking about Dylan never worked for Mike Gravel. Worked for him, huh? And then he's like, anyway, listen to Mike Gravel, that he puts on videos that I was part of the campaign of, that produced it, that I helped produce. It's like, this dumbass doesn't know anything about, this would be like me saying, like, this dumbass doesn't know anything about Bosnia. Anyway, let me use this report literally made by the dumbass in question about Bosnia to prove him wrong. I'm sorry I say nuclear wrong, okay? Sorry, Mike's rubbing off on me. I just can't pronounce the names correctly. This is nothing but just to piss me off. This is why he did this. He did this because he knows that I have still a lot of emotions around this man passing. He knows that I respect the man greatly. And he wants to do this to piss me off. And don't say that, well, no, I think it was a good faith criticism. If it was, then why was it after he did all these other bad faith criticisms where he pivots around constantly and tries to get dunks on the weird Viet Cong thing and all this other stuff, and that I'm acting like Samantha Powers and everything else? This was purely to just poke at a sore spot because a friend of mine died recently. Fuck. Anyway, then I respond saying, dude, that's really low. That's really gross. Why would you do that? Then he tells me to good luck on my pro-intervention career. Also, here's another interaction that happened. And this is the last one I'll look at before I look at the stream. And I'm sorry I'm doing this all day. But, dude, can I just tell you how unbearable it is to also having tried to work with Mike from PA? Having tried to schedule streams or try to have events happen or have him on panels is one of the most unbearable experiences I've ever had. When I did have him on a panel, after he asked me to do him a favor and I did it, once I mute him because he broke the rules, he throws a little baby fit and leaves. Then I say, okay, Destiny's gonna replace Mike then. And then he hears Destiny's gonna replace him, and he comes back to take the position back because Destiny was gonna take it, and he wanted to flip off Destiny. Or how he would basically keep us on hold for months on certain projects we wanted to try to do with him. Or we could just look at how bad faith he was with Hunter Avalon. Like, any of this stuff, man. Like, he is so unbearable to work with, but so many people bite their fucking tongue. And honestly, I literally can't anymore. He's just so unbearable. If I was to imagine what some right-wing person in the middle of Alabama thought, some random right-wing person, like living in the country, some all-down farm working folk who watch Fox News every day, and they had their image of what a left-winger was in their head, Mike is that image. Mike fulfills every single stereotype about left-wingers that the right has in this country. Just block him and let him scream into the void. The thing is, he blocked me. I have a policy on blocking. Can I tell you? I have a policy on blocking. I don't block people if they can use it to wear it as a badge of honor. So what I do is usually just put them on mute. Now, there are some people that I know it really would piss them off if I blocked them when I was engaging with them. Those people I block every time because it's funny to see them get angry. So I wasn't gonna block Mike. I was gonna let him run himself out, get tired, and then block me, which he did. Did he really think that bringing up my dead boss was going to be a W for him? By the way, like it's not like a crazy thing, but let's get into this. I forgot about this. So he makes the decision for whatever dumb fuck reason to try to start talking about Syria. I don't know why he would purposely choose to talk about Syria, knowing how, like, if there's anything I will say I know a decent amount about, it is Syria. Like, I do everything to study the ins and outs of that conflict as much as possible, right? But he decides to pivot to Syria for some dumb fucking reason. Anyway, why are you undermining Biden with babble? I just can't help it. Next, I might even criticize the man himself. That would be a first. Maybe you can get him to put some ground troops into Syria. Then I post an example of me criticizing Joe Biden. Then he pivots to more ground troops, the hippie mantra. Then I'm like, okay, let's engage. Let's engage on Syria. Because I know he doesn't know anything about Syria. The amount of people that suffered due to the withdrawal from northeastern Syria, which extended the war in Syria, was horrifying. The SDF was the most effective force in Syria to combat ISIS and stabilize a huge section of the country. I do enjoy less people dying, Mike. Why am I replying? You don't care. We have been in this war as long as you have been alive. I assure you that you have plenty of other wars to cheerlead for. Maybe check out the humanitarian crisis of Yemen. This guy knows so little about the fucking Middle East. You fucking dumbass. The fucking civil war in Syria started in 2011. And we didn't launch Operation Inherent Resolve until late 2014. How old do you think I am, Mike? Do you think I am fucking 7 years old right now, Mike? Do you think I'm 7? If I am 7, please report me to Twitch support to have my channel suspended because I'm not supposed to be allowed to stream that young. Can we move on? Nope. I'm doing the whole shebang today. Cause this shit's annoying. Didn't Mike rag on Hunter's age? What is it with Mike, man? Okay, Mike, congratulations. You have 1 foot in the grave and I don't. Good job. You're right, Mike. You got in an argument with a 20-year-old on the internet and looked like a fucking idiot. Congratulations. For the person you think is a fake foreign policy advisor, you call Afghans Afghanis while pretending to care. You apparently think the Viet Cong wasn't involved in the fall of Saigon and can't get basic information down about the Afghanistan war or know anything about the war in Syria. Because apparently, you think we've been in Syria since the year 2000. And then after I bring up this to him, he's like, okay, bye. Anyway, he's a fucking idiot, man. His job here is done. That is my retelling of this interaction. In this stream, I was checking to see if he cared. I guess, like, if he was going to bring up Taliban or what he's going to talk about. And the thing that baffled me while I was looking at this is that he consistently, in this stream, continued to get basic facts wrong. And of course, he's bringing up Mike Gravel here specifically to just piss me off. Like, yeah, Mike Gravel had a lot of good things to say, but you can't just, like, dig up his corpse to use it as a weapon and then pretend you respect the man when you're able to use him in that manner. Like, you don't care about that. Like, I cannot emphasize like enough how much this man has, like, given me opportunities. Like, let me be clear. If it wasn't for the man giving me an opportunity, there's a good chance I'd be homeless because I wouldn't be able to build upon my experience in that campaign to get the work that I have today.
Blob.
So he talks about me. Okay, let's see. Let's see what Mike says. Let's see what Mike has to say.
Blob. And I think one of the biggest proponents of the blob is someone here on Twitch who doesn't have any foreign policy actual, like, knowledge or anything. He's a 20-year-old kid, but
Mike, you call them Afghanis. Mike, you You tried to pretend that the Viet Cong wasn't involved in the fall of Saigon. Mike. You were trying to use data from the year 2000 from the CIA after attacking me for using CIA information. Or supposed CIA information. From before the invasion to talk about how the invasion didn't help women. So, he got so much wrong that it fucking baffles me. So, here's a great example. Literacy. Literacy is a good way to check if development in a country is working or not. That if you see a literacy rate rising during anybody's tenure, then that means they're probably doing something right. That doesn't mean they're doing everything right, but it's a good way to track if someone's doing something right. If you go to a poor country and a new administration takes power and then literacy rates skyrocket to go up, then they're probably doing a few things right. Anyway, he wanted to use the example of literacy to show why the American mission in Afghanistan was pointless or bad. And there's a million things you could do to like highlight like the bad things we've done in Afghanistan. This is a strange one, what he does here. So let's listen to this. Again, he is saying I am the fake foreign policy expert. I'm a dumb kid, and people don't need to pay attention to me or whatever. Just put that into perspective. That he believes that people need to listen to him about Afghanistan and not me or any other people, right? Oh, by the way, good point. I wonder if he Googled this, Mike. Did you do some Googling to get this information? Did you do some Googling? I'm going to tell you how you need to do some more Googling, Mike, and how simple it would have been for you to get your numbers right.
Holy shit, the stupidity of people is incredible.
It is, Mike.
Absolutely incredible.
It is, Mike.
I don't know what to tell you. 12.6%, this is from the BBC, 12.6% of women over 15 can read and write. They don't care. They don't care.
Mike,
from the
you
BBC.
fucking dumbass.
6% of women.
Look at what that says there, Mike. What does it say under that image? Source, the year fucking 2000, Mike. We invaded Afghanistan in 2001, you fucking dumbass. How? How can you be this physically stupid? How is it possible? I feel like my time on Twitch might actually cancel my political career. Not because of my interactions with Destiny or Vosh or anything else, but because I, right now, might be being ableist. Because I can't think of any other explanation for how somebody could be this stupid. The source was 2000, Mike. The year 2000. We invaded 1 year after that, Mike. And you want to know what? If you Google the Afghan, something that you apparently hate, if you Google women's literacy rate, this is all he had to do. This is right. Afghanistan. I'm not a good speller. 30%. 30%. And this is from 3 years ago. It's gone up since then. Meaning that if we were to play by Mike's data, that means the literacy rate of Afghanistan has increased by over 100% since our invasion. Mike, this type of incompetence, if I put you in a room with a neocon, like a Bush or Kevin Castley from like Superpower Broadcasting or any of these people, they'd make you look like an idiot. And this is the problem, because he's doing so little effort. He's putting so little research into what he's talking about right now that if you were to put him in a room with anybody who was like a legitimate neocon, he'd make mistakes like this and they'd just clown on him. And that's the problem, is that I don't want us to get clowned on by fucking neocons who have already made their political positions to be incomplete. Like it's politically dead in the water to be a neocon at this point. And he has somehow accidentally made a point that would benefit them. The year 2000, Mike, come on. How are you going to tell me that I'm like a faker or I know nothing about Afghanistan and you're And you're doing this. He's so sure of himself. He's so confident. The Afghanis. Ooh, the Viet Cong weren't involved in the fall of Saigon. Your CIA sources, Dylan. I hate your CIA sources, Dylan. Stop using CIA sources. What's the source for this, Mike? Not only was in the year 2000, but it's a CIA estimate. You're using CIA sources. You try to tell me, like Dylan, you can't use CIA front groups, and then you use sources from the CIA. Jesus Christ.
Over 15 can read and write. They don't care. They don't care. Afghanistan.
I bet there's like, I could look up this article and go through it. I bet there's a 50-50 chance that it says in that article that the literacy rate has increased. And the thing is, my over 100% is like an outdated number. This is from 2018. His own article contradicts him. Did it actually in the article say that it increased? No way. If he is, that means he didn't even read the article and he just scrolled through it for data points. Which again, further points towards the idea that he doesn't give a fuck what happens to Afghans. Literacy. Girls' dropout rates are still very high at secondary schools, and the country's adult literacy rate, 39% over the age of 15, can read and write. One of the lowest in the world. Literacy among female adults still very low, although official statistics are hard to come by. A report by the Central Statistics Organization reported that it's up to 22%, meaning that it increased by a decent factor since the invasion. It could have been done more. It could have definitely be higher. I think all of it shoulda, coulda, woulda on like what programs we could have supported to further increase that literacy rate. But even if you just read this article, his data is wrong. And this data is from 2010, 2011. So even this data, if you use this data, it would still be out of date because the more up-to-date number is 30%, showing an over 100% increase in literacy. God, man. Read the next paragraph. Some women have begun to forge careers for themselves. More than a quarter of the parliament and government employees are now women. Oh, man. What a disaster, man. I never knew Mike was so squad W. Okay, it's no longer Mike from PA. Actually, no, it is Mike from PA. But the PA no longer stands for Pennsylvania. It's now Pashtun, okay? Mike from Pashtun, okay? Because the only way he could be this dishonest if there was some weird sympathies in the background, okay? More than a quarter of parliament and government employees are now women, according to the charity Islamic Relief. A survey by the Central Statistics Organization, CSO, in 2009 found women were being employed by the government at a much faster rate than men. If the female growth rate continued, the share of female employees would be more than 40% by 2020. Almost half in fucking Afghanistan. Dude, I can't. I can't, man. This hurts. This hurts. For those of you who insist that Afghanistan has not changed, almost 60% of Herat University students are women. Oh, by the way, this university, I don't know if you guys saw this, but, you know, I've been keeping a close eye on it, right? There are women releasing reports that this university, which are 60% women, Taliban fighters have gone to this university and are now turning women away from the university, saying, you're not welcome here, go home. Well, the boys, which are 40% of the university, still get to go and get that education. Taliban fighters are doing that while the Taliban claims to care about women's education because they have to for the international community. So in this school, which has made massive gains for women's education, the Taliban are turning them away. And he's trying to say that when it comes to education of women in Afghanistan, we haven't gained anything. We most certainly have. When it comes to women's rights in Afghanistan, thank you so much for $5. That has been the biggest gain that Afghanistan has had in the last 20 years when it comes to actual things that have been achieved with that war. It was the one thing that I could really point to and say, this is one of the few things, like one of the few things I can point to and be like, this is like a solid thing that actually was good that happened. That's not to say that necessarily means we need to stay there forever. Again, I support a withdrawal, but I'm not going to pretend that these women don't deserve to be heard, man. Miss Trump yet? I'm telling you, a lot of people are trying to say this is like, let me be clear. Trump's withdrawal would have been in May, and it would have been 10 times worse. I just want to throw that out there because it would have had even less time to get people ready to get out of the country. People pretending that Trump wasn't going to do a terrible withdrawal when we see his history of doing terrible withdrawals in the middle of fucking nowhere, like in Syria. You're deluded if you actually think he would have done an effective, well-organized withdrawal. This was all started by Trump. Whatever. Maybe not 10 times worse. Maybe that's an exaggeration, but it would have been worse. What was his point of bringing up the female literacy rate? Was it that the conditions of women have not improved in Afghanistan, which they most certainly have? Like, that is one of the main reasons that a lot of these, like, individuals who, like, actually do want us to stay are able to perpetuate their argument so effectively is because it is true that the conditions of women have increased for the better in Afghanistan. So instead of pretending they haven't, accept the fact, deal with that reality, and then explain why we should still withdraw, like I have. Don't live in this unnuanced world where you're going to be citing CIA literacy data about Afghanistan from the year 2000 to show that the invasion of Afghanistan didn't help women. My God, man, it hurts. It hurts for somebody so snobby to be so wrong, man. And use this to just go after people. For what reason, man? And now I'm an advocate of the blob. I'm an advocate of the blob. Michaela Wilkes, is she the blob? The primary challenger, the Steny Hoyer? What about State Senator Jill Carter, who I also advised on foreign policy, who was trying to replace the late, great Elijah Cummings seat, and is a civil rights hero in our local community. And I helped try to, like, get her knowledgeable about, for example, why BDS shouldn't be banned, because Larry Hogan is the Republican governor of our blue state of Maryland, and he's been targeting BDS unconstitutionally. And so when Jewish newspapers were asking for her opinion, I basically had to sit there and be like, okay, how do we balance this correctly? How do we balance, like, statements about this correctly? And we were able to get through it. I'm studying international relations. I don't have a degree yet. Congratulations, Mike. But I don't need people to pretend that I'm a foreign policy expert. I don't need people to come up to me and say, Dylan, you know everything about foreign policy. You don't need to treat me like I'm some little foreign policy god I don't want to be. Simply look at the predictions I've made up to this point, look at the analysis that I've made up to this point, look at the experience I do have, and take that into consideration maybe when you listen to me. And you don't even need to take it into consideration at all. Just take my statements at face value if you want to. Like, you can just look at my statements and be like, I don't even need to think about his experience. I disagree with him for this, and that reason. You can do that. I don't like being called a foreign policy expert. Because I know how much people have, like, worked their whole lives in foreign policy, and even many of them won't call themselves a foreign policy expert. Because the term expert has so much weight to it. But he's going to pretend that people should listen to him about Afghanistan when he's consistently getting literally everything, like literally every single thing wrong about the country. He knows nothing about the country of Afghanistan. I would be surprised if I brought Mike and I was like, hey, Mike, here's a map. Find me Afghanistan. He'd get lost. He tells me, well, I know it's in the Middle East, right? And then it'd be boom, done. It's over. It's over. Already failed. I'm sorry. He doesn't know anything about the country, man. And he doesn't care. If he did, he'd put more effort into his work.
He has kind of, like, built himself up just from, fake it till you make it energy. Just kind of, like, state that you're a foreign policy expert.
I have never stated that I'm a foreign policy expert. I've never done that. I just stated my work experience, Mike. I just stated my work experience. Source me where I say that. Source where I call myself a foreign policy expert. I've called myself a foreign policy advisor to congressional candidates. You want to know why? Because I was a foreign policy advisor to 2 congressional candidates. I've studied international relations at the University of Maryland, and I'm going to finish getting my degree at the University of Maryland on the issue, on IR, very shortly, hopefully. Pursuing that. I work for the former ambassador to Romania, and I'm trying to learn everything I can from them. I never claimed to be an expert because I feel that word's weighted. But I will say, and maybe I'm giving myself too much credit here, that I do think I know more than the average Joe. And Mike, I know for a fact that I know more than you. Because you can't get basic information right about this, even when the information's staring you in the face. Oh, yeah. See, we didn't help the literacy rate. See from the source from the year 2000. God, man.
Become one, right? Like one of those kind of situations. By
the way, he says fake it till you make it. Mike, just tell me. Just tell me where I've claimed to have job experience I don't have. Or points of my campaign experience. And it's easy for Mike, because Mike will just make broad claims about like things he's done in politics. Like we know he ran for office. And what happened when he ran to office? His campaign couldn't file campaign documents correctly. And so he lost by default. So Mike's political experience, when he got involved in politics because mommy lost, is very, you know, credible and gives his voice meaning. But the rest of it, when he claims everything else, he doesn't tell anybody. Well, who did you work for? Well, I don't want to say, because I know how the internet is. Everybody knows who I worked for. It's all public information. People have dug up my LinkedIn to, like, attack me and stuff. I am very open about the organizations that I work for and have worked for. So it's really weird to have somebody who won't be public about their experience challenging my experience. Not that it matters who has more experience here or not, because everything he says about Afghanistan seems to just be like patently incorrect.
This is where your taxpayer dollars went, chat. Look at this. Look at the marble. Look at the marble floors. Look at the gold furniture.
Is he done?
Look, that's where you're calling. Does anyone have that link from the Trash Future podcast? And evil people in Afghanistan. The theocrats. Anybody saying, oh, the poor Afghan national government. Oh, no, the beleaguered. What they were the most corrupt, evil people in Afghanistan who would sell out their country.
Did he just say that the Afghan government was the most corrupt, evil people in Afghanistan? Mike. Mike, do you see why it feels like you're kind of underplaying how bad the Taliban are? Did you really just fucking say that?
Oh, the poor Afghan national government. Oh, no, the beleaguered. What they were the most corrupt, evil people in Afghanistan.
Dude, he just sounds like a Taliban news outlet right now. 1 second. Let me put something on. I'm about to be put on a watch list for this. Now, I can't find a Taliban song because I don't even think that exists, so I'm just going to have to play this.
We talked about the Bakabazi boys on the stream the last few days, and I don't want to bring it up again because I'm so tired of it. But if you see anybody saying, oh, the poor Afghan national government, oh, no, the beleaguered, what they were the most corrupt, evil people in Afghanistan who would sell out their country for $1. This is not to say the Taliban is good. The Taliban is far-right, bloodthirsty.
Oh, there it is. But they're not as bad as the national government. Okay, got it. He just let it slip. He thinks that the Afghan government was not as bad as the Taliban. Holy fucking shit. I didn't think he'd actually admit it. He just went full mask off. And it just goes back to plan. You know what? I don't think it's going to get any worse than that. I think we're good. I think we're going to wrap this up. This is going to be one weird YouTube video. I don't know how I'm going to edit all this down. It's like almost 3 hours of just complaining about this maniac. My God. Jesus Christ. He actually doesn't think He really legitimately thinks that the Taliban is not as bad as the Afghan government. That is, I am actually a little blown. I didn't think he'd be that direct with it, man. Dude, when I... Dude. This shit was just true. The thing is now, the problem is we just talked about Afghanistan for like 3 hours, so we should probably not talk about Afghanistan anymore. But I think I'm gonna try to release like a full video essay about the Afghanistan conflict post-mortem. She's just a mean person, which, I mean, I think I've learned that firsthand. It's probably the case. But she probably wants that, like, an aggressive type of, like, banter back and forth, right? Because I remember, like, Destiny and, like, when she was, like, I think, like, not a thing, but when they were, you know, together, like, together physically. I don't know how to put it without being offensive. Like, they had a really aggressive banter back and forth. And, oh, Destiny got a little further. Anyway. Destiny fucked Bad Bunny because he was able to be... We don't have no clue. I'm not going to talk about fucking. When I said together physically, I mean, I meant in person. Chat. Chat. Calm down. You're a feminist stream. By the way, look how I look in this. My hair was so unbelievably long here. And the whole look there, man. I look like I inherited the fortune of Hugh Hefner.